So I hope this is really informal. It's kind of hard to put all FDA device regulatory and so forth into a presentation for 45 minutes. So these slides are basically just something to work off. I'd rather make sure I answer your questions and tell you what it's like to be at FDA. And I was there 33 years, retired 4 years ago, all in the, except for my first year, I started drugs. And that wasn't quite as exciting as the brand new device center, and so I spent the rest of my time in pre-market at devices. And so that's my area of specialty. When I retired from the agency, I went to work at, you see here, MDMA. That's the Medical Device Manufacturers Association. It's a trade association and that represents mostly small companies, more of the startup types, and then a lot of times after a while they were bought by Medtronic or someone, and then they become members of AbaMed. So I had colleagues at both places, but I really liked the startups and trying to help people navigate through the FDA literally and try to figure out when you should talk to them and when you definitely don't want to talk to them. And don't set yourself up for failure in that way. Not that they're bad people or anything, but you don't want to box yourself in. So just the way to approach. And I'll just mention, I'm not an advertising person, but I didn't know till I worked at MDMA for a couple of years, part-time. A company, startup and whatnot, small company, can belong to MDMA for $250 a year. And you get all the videos, you get the latest on legislation, CMS, Patent Office, you'll get emails and things like that. So, again, I'm not here on commission or anything, but just, it might be good to know. And Greenleaf Health, where I went after I retired from the agency, we're just a small group, less than 20, of all former FDA folks, pretty much FDA nerds, that want to help people strategize and work with the agency. We have deputy commissioner, deputy of drugs, myself, center director from devices, and we all just love it, so we can't give it up. So anyway, that's who we are. We'll skip that. Okay, so technology development. I was just saying to one of the folks here a few minutes ago, there's a tech transfer office at FDA, and the head of it, her name's Annie Saha, and they do internships at the agency and different things like that, and I'm not sure how that would work for you all, but happy to pass on the name, and she's really great and an interesting group, and obviously very excited about technology, et cetera. They work with DARPA and different universities and Department of Defense and all that jazz. So obviously it's a complex process with all these players involved in the device world and technology development, National Institute of Health, the payers, and you're always hearing about that on Capitol Hill as well. So FDA's, for anybody who, FDA is the federal agency responsible for ensuring that foods are safe, wholesome, sanitary, human and veterinary drugs, biologics, and devices are safe and effective, cosmetics are safe, and electronic products that emit radiation are safe. So it's about 25 cents on every dollar that is something that FDA regulates, the majority of which obviously is food. My group doesn't do anything with foods. I'm not sure if your tech does, but we do know the former food people if you ever want to talk to them. Veterinary devices, just for any of you who might be working and strategizing, require no pre-market review by the agency. So if you wanted to make a suture, a new type suture, for example, and sell it to vets or veterinary use, you don't need any pre-market clearance, and then maybe you'll go on and make that suture for human use, which would require FDA review. We don't want to worry about our animals and all that. So if something harmful happened, FDA has the authority under the Center for Vet Medicine to pull that product back from the market that might be used on a horse or something. But pre-market, there's no requirement. And that can be very helpful for a startup. And electronic products, we also do the TVs and microwave ovens and all that kind of thing, as well as the Mammography Quality and Safety Act, and MRIs and X-ray equipment and all that. We're supposed to ensure products are truthful and accurate as they're labeled, et cetera, and there are titles under the law that affect all government, if somebody were to lie to the government and all that kind of thing, obviously. As I said, I was at drugs 1 year, and I don't want to offend any drug people or anything, but kind of that's the drugs yesterday, today, tomorrow, and the device center is where it's happening, I have to say. We have pills that you can actually swallow, and they can read through infrared and monitor, look inside your small intestines, large intestines, take your temperature, all kinds of things like that. Very exciting. And I should probably explain what I did at FDA. Maybe that would be helpful. Again, I said I worked on the pre-market side. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a physician. I was just in the right place at the right time. And when the device center was new, I kind of just grew up with that device center. So set up the regulatory programs for the device center is what I've worked on my whole career there. And so for me, all the expertise, when I first started, there were about 60 people, and there are about 2,000 now in the device center. They're experts in dialysis, or experts in heart valves, or experts in, dental materials, whatever. And they come and talk to you and try to figure out the pathways to market, and working with the industry, consumer, patient advocacy groups, et cetera, trade associations, Congress. So I got to see so many devices all the time. I mean, it was just really fun. But most people there are very specialized in their review. If they review sutures, they're going to review sutures. Dialysis, they review dialysis. And you could move and change your specialty. It's not that, but most people are very much, into the dialysis equipment or whatever, or maybe they're working on artificial pancreas. So that's how they work. And another thing I want to make sure that I would have said when I was there, and I certainly say it since I've left the agency and working with people, don't ever just talk to one person there, or don't ever email one person back and forth. I mean, there's a lot of power working at FDA, and I'm not saying malicious things, but one person, it's hard to know all these rules and regulations. And a lot of people speak and say this is a requirement when it's not a requirement. It's their personal interest in science and wanting more and have you do the testing, and that's not necessarily what you have to do. So you always want to be ready to get clarification. You always want to talk to one person and copy someone else and follow up. Don't just run with a study because such and such said, you need some magical number of patients and so forth. Okay, that's really important. Obviously devices are everything. Well, I shouldn't say everything, but I'll show the definition. We had a, as I said, I started there in the late 70s when it was first the Medical Device Center, and we had to explain what devices were. We had to explain them on the Hill, and we had this suitcase, and we put devices in them. And obviously no MRI machines or anything like that fit into this suitcase, but we had to explain things like contact lenses, bone cement, tissue adhesives. They were all regulated as a drug prior to the medical device amendments in 1976, first required pre-market review of devices. It was finally passed due to some problems with heart valves and what was called quackery type products. So this law was enacted in 1976. And I'm going to show you the definition in a second, but so tissue adhesives and contact lenses met the definition of a device much more than a drug, but the agency was regulating them because they thought they were very important to public health and et cetera. So they had them under the drug provisions. So anyway, and here this is on video, I'm going to say, but anyway, I had this suitcase, and my oldest is in nursery school, and they're going to have parent day where you come in and talk about careers or something like that, and my son, come in. I was like, I'll bring the suitcase. This is going to be so fun. Well, I didn't look at the suitcase before I went in there. That was not too smart. And four and 5-year-olds in there, and open up the suitcase, and has a hearing aid, and had a stethoscope, and of course, what's this? All the kids had a breast implant, had condoms. I was just like, oh my God, so. Anyway, I did it for my younger child too, but I took a lot of those products out before I did that. Anyway, Band-Aids, obviously. And some of these products do not require pre-market review as long as they are labeled a certain way. If you didn't say, the Band-Aid would cure skin cancer, that's going to be exempt for the same old kind of thing. And actually almost half the devices on the market when you go into the hospital are exempt from pre-market review by FDA, just by the number, quantity-wise, about half. So this is the definition of a device. It was actually tweaked in 1990 for the part here in bold. It's something that does not achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action. So just to emphasize, if that's the primary purpose, it's going to be regulated as a drug. And there is someone at the Center for Devices that their full-time job is deciding whether or not something's a device. The first thing on a review memo that a reviewer does, these hundreds of reviewers, they have to determine if it's a device or they don't want to waste time reviewing it. Maybe it needs to go somewhere else to another part of the agency. Or for example, Consumer Product Safety Commission, EPA has low-level disinfection, and the same product, if it were labeled for high-level disinfection, like you've heard probably a lot on the TV about the endoscopes, and they can't be sterilized like in an autoclave, as I understand it, but they have high-level disinfection. All those disinfecting products are regulated by FDA. So anyway, what was I going to say here? So for example, diapers, adult diapers, up here on the top is an instrument, and notice it's not medical device, it's a device. So that makes it much broader. Means an instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, contrivance, implant, in vitro reagent, or other similar or related articles, including component part accessory, which is recognized by the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. I don't know any devices like that, but everybody was kind of from the drug center, so they wrote it that way. Intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, and that was put in specifically for pregnancy because they said that's not a disease and they want to cover devices for pregnancy. Cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals. Now you'll see, unlike drugs, most devices don't say they're a cure or they don't say they're a treatment, but they'll say they aid in it. And if you wanted to go in, it's very critical how you write your indication for use. And if you want to get to here, you might want to start here. But if you went in and said cure, that's going to be a huge threshold and a lot of clinical data, and that's probably not where you want to start. And then this about whether it's a chemical action or not, you still see court cases today going on about whether something's a drug or a device. So we had, and these things have gone back and forth. So for example, contrast agents used in MRI equipment used to be a drug, and then they decided they're an accessory to the device. Now they're back being a drug, and you can get really caught up circular because even though it is really awesome to work at FDA, people can be very territorial. They don't want it to go back to the other center or whatever, and you can get caught up in that somewhat. So you just, hopefully you don't, but it's possible. So we've had, they have chemicals that you put on your arm to prevent biological warfare, or chemical warfare, and those were regulated as a drug. And then somebody came in with one and it had spray, and it said the primary mode of action is the force of the spray, and then secondary, it would eat the chemical on your, and prevent this chemical warfare. And you'll see court cases going back and forth. Is it the chemical first and then the spray, or pages and pages of court cases. So this is a very interesting job at the agency, and you definitely, most people want to be a device. They don't want to be a drug lead. They rather be a device. It's less cumbersome and certainly less expensive because there are user fees in the millions for devices. So the artificial pancreas, kind of an old slide, but that is something that's got priority at the commissioner's office and is very, for lack of a better term, sexy product with a lot of interest from the different centers. Artificial pancreas. The drug-eluting stent, basically this changed the practice of medicine, and FDA does not like to be the place that makes decisions that change the practice of medicine. You'll see, they want all the, academic institutions, the, ACOG, the associations, et cetera, to be out there, the AMA, before all of a sudden FDA comes in and changes the practice of medicine. So if you have anything that, earth-shattering, you want to really work with your associations or that type of colleague to get FDA on board. So the drug-eluting stents was a great win. So the primary mode of action was the stent, and the drug was secondary. It wasn't at first a love-in at the agency there working on this, but the two center directors finally had to get together and say, you know what, this is important, this is great. And so this was heavily consulted by the drug center, but the device center had the lead, and it went through all the device rules and regulations, including manufacturing. So the agency is very big in personalized medicine, companion diagnosis, diagnostics, I'm sorry. The 3D printing, this is a tracheobronchial tube. Now that kind of product, we've had CAD systems, et cetera. Some people, there's a big debate, you might hear, somebody will say, well, you don't need to go to FDA because it's custom. It's custom because that was made just for that person. And FDA really does not think many things are custom. If a person had a huge tumor and they had to make the tube to go around the tumor for that one person, that might be custom because it's an unusual shape, et cetera. But basically, orthotics and artificial eyes and these 3D printed type products, FDA is going to review the specifications and a range of the type, uses, sizes, et cetera, the materials, the biocompatibility, and they're not going to say it's custom. Customized, that's the term. So now, from the first one of the early slides there, we have so many more stakeholders in the device world. The IT companies and phone companies and Dell Computer and Apple and the FCC's involved, Federal Communications Commission, just on and on and on, more than we've ever had before. The regulations for devices that firms need to abide by don't really even account for electronic labeling. They're so old and antiquated. Apps are, off the chart, never envisioned, et cetera. So trying to make it work and be in the real world is a constant task for the agency. I think it's interesting to see the size of device firms. So you can see in the blue there, or purple, whatever, how many have less than 10 employees. And so and very, very few in that 2%, the Medtronics and the Boston Scientifics of the world. So, we still, when I left, would get applications on notebook, paper, and pencil from somebody's garage that had an idea. It might be a great idea, but, and we process it and everything like that, but you wouldn't go to the drug center and see notebook, paper, and pencil, I guarantee you. And healthcare, is obviously changing. Yes, sir?
Yeah, that previous slide, are those applications or approved devices?
These are just the type of firms that are registered as a device manufacturer.
So have successfully gone through the process?
Have successfully gone through the process in that, again, about half the devices don't require pre-market, tongue depressors as far as quantity. So, it's a mixture. So now, more healthcare is moving from everyone going to the hospital to moving to the home. More and more products are over the counter. That used to be a big no-no, that we wouldn't, have many things over the counter, such as I still don't think that we have cleared an over-the-counter strep test because they said if it's over the counter, it's supposed to be at the 6th grade level, and if somebody didn't use the strep test correctly, then someone else might get strep if they had a false negative. So you'll say, but you can have over-the-counter AIDS tests. So and the laws for one reason, when you go back through the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, all the way back to 1906, there's a law put on, usually because something terrible happened, and a law, and a law, and a law, and they just don't all blend together. So you'll see things that, and so that's why I'm saying if one person told you something doesn't mean you just want to make sure. So obviously, keys to patient access is evidence, value, reimbursement. I understand there are a lot more problems in reimbursement now. I understand from the Hill and the Trade Association and getting your code through. So, you know, it's a process. You go to the patent office, you go to FDA, and then you're going over to CMS for your reimbursement. And so there's a lot of talk and work being done, obviously, in that area. And then, of course, the marketplace has to like it. So, you know, yesterday, it's accelerating at a very rapid pace, and it is really hard to for FDA folks to stay up to date, even though they try to follow their type device. The internship program that I was mentioning earlier, people who actually have worked in industry, in the hospital, et cetera, coming in and working with the FDA review staff and keeping them up to date. They go out and do site visits, the review staff, to see the manufacturing and look at, you know, how things are done to help them keep up with this very accelerated pace. So you have surgical procedures and you stay in the hospital, then you have the short stays for ICD leads, and, you know, tomorrow, hopefully even better. So the combination products, actually a law was enacted on combination products in 2002, and that's because more and more products are not just a device or just a drug. Like I said, the drug-eluting stent. You have combination products where there's a coating, an antimicrobial coating on a catheter, and if that antimicrobial coating on the catheter is obviously a combination product of a device and a drug, if the antimicrobial is on there to keep the catheter free from, or not free from contamination, but to prevent contamination along the catheter, that's going to be a device lead. If the identical product has the antimicrobial on there to provide antimicrobial therapy to the site on the skin, then it's going to be a drug lead. So it doesn't mean you can't have both, but you probably want to start with it as a device. I'm not sure if that made sense for both of these, but I'm just saying it's extremely important, obviously, how that starts out. How you start going into the agency and describing it, and each word on that combination product. And there are various fees and, you know, different oh, I didn't even turn my phone off. I'm so embarrassed. Sorry. Oh, I didn't even think about it. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So anyway, devices, again, are more complex than drugs, I think, as far as, you know, technology. And, you know, it's very difficult to write a guidance document to cover all device types. Certainly there are many different types of drugs and biologics, but, you know, from obviously a tongue depressor to a heart valve is pretty different types of questions you're going to ask. Well, we don't have pre-market review for tongue depressors, but we'll see. Okay, so medical device amendments, pre-market review of devices started in 1976, gave us the definition. Basically what the law said is we had to identify everything that was legally on the market at that time, because the agency could have taken something off the market. They had the authority to do that. And so we had to identify them, and we had to put them in a risk stratification policy, or hierarchy, I'm sorry. So as I said, the law has changed over different studies and, you know, tweaked here and there over the last few decades. So the main thing is, this goes back to the original regulations on devices, because it's very upsetting, at least to me personally, when I read in the newspaper, you know, FDA doesn't do clinical trials for devices, FDA doesn't get data, it's a rubber stamp, or I forget some of the other things you hear. And I think any of you who have interacted with a reviewer are not feeling that warm rubber stamp feeling. And there's nobody there who's going to sign their name and just say, whatever, I don't really care. They'll probably go the other extreme where you have to push back. But it's all about reasonable assurance that a device is safe when it can be determined based on valid scientific evidence, that the probable benefits to health from the use of the device for its intended uses and conditions of use, when accompanied by adequate directions and warnings against unsafe use, outweigh the probable risks. And no device is going to be 100% all the time, and it's all about reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. So, somebody who's telling you at the agency you have to have 1,000 patient clinical trial, or if it's some proving an antimicrobial, 20,000 patients or something, you want to get back to reasonable assurance and what's real and helping the patient and all that kind of thing. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you, and then also likewise reasonable assurance about the effectiveness. So the safety and effectiveness for devices. So these regulations are very old, from the very beginning of device regulation, and it has to do with the risk basis for devices, the 3 classes. So again, these regulations are old, so they pretty much, people were at the drug center were writing them, and they realized for devices they can't all be double-blind randomized controlled clinical trials. It just can't be with devices. So fortunately, they spelled out partially controlled, objective trials without matched controls, qualified, all of these things can be taken into consideration for a device, not all double-blind randomized clinical trials by any means. So, again, as I said, kind of redundantly here, it can be a tongue depressor, and it can be a surgical robot, and you've probably seen the devices coming out now that will help a certain status of paraplegic walk, the robotic devices like that as well. On 60 Minutes or different places you'll see that. So here are the basic controls for devices that we were given in '76. And Class 1 general controls, that means you might have to do a pre-market submission, but most of these Class 1 devices you don't. You have to register where you're going to manufacture your device and list what type you have so FDA knows when they should come out and inspect you. They can say your device is misbranded, so if you put out your Band-Aid and you said you put it here and it will cure skin cancer, you're going to be misbranded because it's not labeled properly. Adulterated, if you have something that's supposed to be sterile 10 to the minus 6 and it's not, then it would be adulterated. We also had the ability to ban devices and say, the agency say, this can never be shown to be safe and effective. We only have one. Does anybody know what it might be? One device? We banned it around 1980. It was synthetic hair implants. They were plastic, and they caused severe scarring and infection. So that is actually banned in the US. So Class 2 devices, most devices that require pre-market review in the US are Class 2. So they have those basic general controls, and then there's something else special, a higher threshold that they might have, like a standard, certain labeling, certain information has to be provided. Those, so actually the majority of high-risk, life-supporting, life-sustaining devices in the US, and contrary to what you might see written up in articles in the paper, are these Class 2 device types. So it's not risk based on life-supporting and life-sustaining. It's risk based on what the product is and how well everyone understands it, how well it can be regulated. So ventilators and dialysis equipment, anesthesia machines, they're all Class 2, but they're very well understood. And there are various international standards and different things that Class 3 will be your basic general controls and things that just need an individual review for safety and effectiveness, and FDA cannot or hasn't said, here's how we know all the risks and how to mitigate them, for all the device types generically, not just this one. So that's kind of how it's divided up based on the understanding. Yeah, I think I just went over that. We can take any device to an advisory panel before it's cleared or approved for marketing, or they can have an advisory panel after that because new information becomes available. So probably you see every day on TV something about surgical mesh. which has a tremendously huge denominator of use for decades and decades, way before the medical device amendments. But there were some people have problems, and FDA has had 2 meetings actually after the clearance to talk about it, to see what more can be done, bringing in, different medical associations, academia, et cetera. And these advisory panel members are special government employees, physicians, statisticians, CDC people who come in and work with the FDA to try to find, what's reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. And these are always open to the public, and the transcripts are available online, so they're always transcribed. Let's see here. This is somewhat new, probably since 1997. We have the ability for these orphan products. So for a device, it's less than $4,000 in the US. So you might have an identical product for a different use that's not a humanitarian device, an orphan device, but for this orphan population, this is possible. And in this case, it's safety and probable benefit. It doesn't have to be safety and effectiveness. So for this specific population. And so first you have to have the determination it's less than $4,000 a year, and then you can go through this application process that's supposed to be more timely and more helpful. And this is the humanitarian orphan type criteria. Probable benefit. So again, 510K, that's a program I worked on most of my career. It's the way most devices go to market in the US. We get more applications at the agency for 510K than anything else. Again, it's not a rubber stamp, but you submit the application to FDA and they have to see if it's at least as safe and effective as the other products that were on the market of the same generic type. So most new indications, most new technologies go to market because they don't want to make it identical to the competitor and you want to have some improvement. We do have a process. Well, we set it up. Actually, there was just a big court case. So before I retired, we had a process. Let's see what's happening with the courts. But if something went wrong, FDA can pull that back and rescind it, which has not happened very often. But you may remember, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, the CEO of Bausch & Lomb went on TV and did commercials saying certain contact lens solution, get rid of it. Some people had gone blind from some very rare thing that happened with that particular contact lens solution. They never knew exactly why, but they stopped marketing it and we pulled back their clearance. So nobody else could piggyback on it, was really the reason. Bausch & Lomb was, most recalls that you see, it would be rare that it's an FDA mandated recall. Usually the firms take care of it and they comply with it. Recall is a term used in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and we think it's particularly difficult in the device area because if your relative or friend or somebody has an implant of some type and you hear on TV there's going to be a recall, I think that's pretty scary. It's not like a recall of a drug that you can just, put that bottle of pills somewhere else or take it back to the pharmacy. So recall doesn't mean obviously you have to have your implant removed, but there may be an additional warning or make sure your doctor knows, etc. So again, 510K is a piggyback system about at least as safe and effective, and what's new today is old tomorrow in this program. So you may get asked a lot of data questions. You may have to have clinical data for the first one, and after that, at some point in time, it will piggyback and you may maybe just refer to literature or etc. Again, most new technologies and most indications go to market through 510K by far. As I said, we had to identify the ones legally on the market. There's a coding process for these technologies. We've worked with the AMA on their coding and Medicare, Medicaid, CMS on their coding, but none of this matches up, but they exist. So 510K, in order to be eligible, there has to be a predicate device, and that means something on the market before 76 basically, but nobody in 2015 or maybe 1 out of 4,000 a year comes and compares to something from before 76. Usually they're comparing to the thing that was just cleared recently and piggybacking on that. FDA, this program's strange because it has 4 parts. The first 3 are just regulatory. So you may be trying to talk to, maybe the reviewer's telling you, you have a new intended use and we're not going to accept your application. And you're going to say, but I have this great data. They don't even look at the data to the 4th step. You could have the best data in the world, but you have to get through this regulatory part. So just for example, stethoscopes, everyone knows were on the market before, I think, probably a lot of you weren't even born then, but anyway, stethoscopes were on the market before May 28, 1976. The manual ones are in the least class, regulatory class, and they don't require pre-market. The electronic ones do, and then someone came in a couple years ago with a lung sound monitor. And so we obtained data on that, and we were able to find that at least as safe and effective and make this loop rather than having the much more cumbersome type of pre-market application. So substantial equivalence, this is all Congress told us about this. We think Congress thought it was going to be a temporary program that would just go away, but when that law was passed in May of '76, they couldn't take all devices off the market. So, they had this bridging. And so they said, as long as it's equivalent, and it took us 10 years to interpret this language and come out with a guidance, but not so narrow as to refer only to devices that are identical to market, nor so broad as to refer to devices which are intended to be used for the same purposes as marketed. And the committee, meaning the congressional committee, should be narrow when it needs to be narrow, should be broad when it needs. Yeah, so that's what we had to work with. So over the years, there have been different external and internal criticism groups looking at it, trying to make it stronger, better, react to different groups. So 510K comes from a section of the Act. There are regulations. It's a determination regarding marketing clearance. FDA actually does not approve any drugs or any devices. People often think or say to me, they think FDA does all this testing, and FDA doesn't do the testing. The firms do the testing. Excuse me. So FDA approves applications for drugs and applications for certain device types, and the ones that go through 510K for a substantial equivalence are cleared, so the application's cleared, but never, technically the device or the drug itself. So clinical questions, again, most clinical studies are for 510K just by the numbers. And, we're going to look at sensitivity, specificity, predictive value, odds, population setting, age. There's a big push for more pediatric devices, but firms don't really want to come in with that. And, they have a general use, just pretty much like drugs. You don't see many drugs individually indicated for pediatric use, but doesn't mean pediatricians don't prescribe them. FDA does not regulate the practice of medicine. They get nervous if they get a product that might change the practice of medicine, but they don't want to be the front runner in that. They want medical folks to do that. The correct statistical approach, you may want a statistician, etc. If you have, there are all kinds of rules on clinical studies and clinical trials, and there are people there you can call to help with these questions. Again, be careful who you ask, be careful how you ask it, so you don't box yourself in. But certainly, there's a group on investigational device exemptions. That's the type of application. If your device is significant risk to the patient, you have to have your IRB approve it and the FDA. And if it's non-significant risk, just the IRB. And there are a lot of regulations that go along with it.
What's the IDE?
What's an IDE? That's the investigational device exemption.
What's it?
And that is the type application you have if you're going to do a study in the US, a clinical study, and it's a significant risk device. And FDA has on their website what's a significant risk device, and if you have questions, how you can get that answered. So I'm happy to talk about that more. So significant risk, potential serious risk to health, an implant. We did have one firm come in with a joint implant, and they had done their whole study as non-significant risk, and that's not usually a good way to start. Supporting or sustaining human life, etc. Now, if you do your study overseas, and more people are doing it overseas because FDA really anteed up the IDE program. If you follow all of that, there's been a lot of drama. So more and more studies are going overseas, and foreign data can be used in an application, sometimes easier than others. In the in vitro diagnostic area, it's a little more difficult because they want samples from a US population. Here's the non-significant risk, like the MRI studies, non-invasive blood pressure measuring, etc. Contact lenses that are not the 30-day extended wear type. So anyway, you'll hear a lot of times there are no IDE studies for 510Ks, but the majority are, just because the majority of products are 510K. They might not be 2,000 patient studies, they might not be 500, but they have to anything that is not cleared for marketing in the US has to go, and the studies being done in the US on the US population, including military bases overseas, etc., has to follow these rules about safety of the patient. And also safety of, it takes into account the provider as well. Like, surgical gloves, it's not just for the patient, and maybe they have an infection, it's to protect the surgeon, and so forth. So once FDA has cleared or approved the application, there are other requirements that a firm has having to do with the quality manufacturing practice, making sure you're not misbranded or adulterated. There are regulations, medical device reporting regulations, where you have so much time to report if there's a death or serious injury. There's a way to report adverse events. This has just, believe it or not, gone electronic in just the last few years. It's really difficult when those adverse events reports would come in to the group that reviews those at the agency, which will be, nurses and statisticians and epidemiologists and physicians and engineers and so forth. And these adverse events could come from a patient voluntarily, from a firm, depending on what it is, from a physician. I think everyone generally agrees and understands there's underreporting. If something goes wrong, you don't always know, was it the device, was it the surgeon, was it the this, was it the that, and trying to put all those pieces together. But the electronic, hindsight's really good, but going forward and trying to catch when there's a problem, and there needs to be a recall or something. But anyway, finally, in the electronic age here. And FDA, you see more and more of this on TV, I think, particularly there are more advertisements for drugs, and it'll tell you report to FDA if you have a problem with your drug and so forth. So it's not just unique to devices, there's underreporting. I don't think most people at home sit around and think about, should I tell FDA that, whatever. There's research, there's a group at the Center for Devices that does research. There's a possibility maybe to internship, and they have beautiful equipment, beautiful offices. All the pre-market people there and the pre-market people and the quality system post-market enforcers, we consider this kind of the country club, but it's kind of fun to work there. So the total product life cycle, devices certainly maybe stay in your body and your system longer than a drug or a pill, and trying to keep all of those things going together, the prototype, the post-market. Anyway, it's quite a cycle for devices. So the regulation is a delicate balance. I mean, there are ethical dilemmas. Should we clear this product? I was saying earlier, I remember it was a huge deal around 1990. Centrifuges are exempt. Okay, used in a lab, a centrifuge. And a firm in Washington was using the centrifuge to separate sperm in hopes of a female or a male baby. And so, somebody went in, and then it gets on the news, and then what's FDA doing about that? And did we say they're exempt and nobody cares? And it can get very complicated. And it will change with administrations. It's just how it is. So FDA has these dilemmas of mandating and protecting the public health as well as patient autonomy. We have regulations on tracking devices. So some are mandatory, other firms do optionally. So if you have a hip implant or a pacemaker or something, they maybe give you a card, and it's up to the manufacturer to tell the physician you have to track people. Some people don't want to be tracked, and it's America, so they don't have to be tracked. But, all those kinds of issues. We have to look at product safety and effectiveness, and also the availability of the product. So, if there's, a problem with the device, for example, on the endoscopes the other day, and they were talking about horrible infection and some deaths, which was on an endoscope that was particularly hard to clean, I think, for a further gallbladder procedure. Anyway, if they just removed them all from the market, then the surgeons wouldn't have the tool. So, they put out safety alerts and make sure people are cleaning them properly or doing the best they can to clean them properly and but you can't always just go out and remove them from the hospital that day. And to get the safety alerts out and make sure the American Medical Association and people are caught up and they're not caught off guard when they come out, and CDC and all that, it can be very touchy, I guess is the word. So for innovation, it looks so simple when I write this out. Good science, good sound development plan for your investors, FDA, all of the pieces and parts there, understanding what that regulatory process is, how it can help you, how it can make things more difficult, adapting to change throughout the product life cycle. So here's a little bit on the good science, preclinical, whether you need it or not, clinical, whether you need it or not, but it has to work. Development, you might spend hours deciding how to start with your intended use. That is so critical. Prototype to production, etc., and stuff happens. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I sat in meetings and firms wanted to bring in their device and show, and it broke, And so usually we tell people, why don't you make a video? Because you don't know that they pass it around, the reviewer does this, and then it breaks, and then they're looking at you, and you've never seen it break. I mean, believe me, I've seen a lot. The regulatory process, so that's this, they told you this, so they told, who's they? That drove me crazy when I retired. Everybody said, well, FDA told me. I said, who told you that? And they tell you, somebody in the mailroom, they called the mailroom and blah, blah, blah. It literally, what type of submission, and you want to have, FDA wants to have the least regulatory amount needed to provide reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness, and I assume you do too. And you want to take into account who's going to look at it. Is it going to be looked at by the Office of Combination Products? Is the device center going to consult with the drug center? If you go to a meeting with FDA and FDA is bringing a statistician, you want to bring a statistician. You want to bring a medical expert if it's going to be something on clinical, etc. So you need to adapt to changes in the clinical practice, as does FDA, and they're usually a little bit slower there. Change in safety and effectiveness profile. Supply chain is a huge deal. You probably remember all of that with the, what was the blood product that came from China. Do anybody remember what I'm talking about? The, that you put on the, well, anyway, I'm trying to think of it. And anyway, it was coming into the country, and FDA didn't have the right name of the manufacturer, and they went to the wrong place. And this person said, well, they bought it from here, who bought it from here, and all this has gotten to be much more complicated with FDA than it ever was in the past. And it's hard for them to do, and obviously can be for you as well. Changes in the marketplace, the political landscape does have a significant part with FDA at times. So new reality, try to get involved in the process. They put so much stuff online. So if you can't go to a panel meeting, oftentimes they will have it online so you can watch it from your desk. They'll have the transcripts online. They have congressional hearings online oftentimes and on C-SPAN. Whatever you can do to attend or get the transcripts, read the guidance documents, comment on them, say where they don't work for you. There are curveballs. Be ready to push back, or as I would say, clarify, make sure that's exactly what they said. Never just talk to one person, and every time you talk to them, I would follow up with an email saying what you think you heard, just to clarify and for the record, that kind of thing. And obviously, utilizing the global market, so don't give up. I hope that was a good time.
Right.
A little over.